Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Retirement Planners of America podcast. I am Ken Moraif. I'm the founder and CEO of Retirement Planners of America. Thank you for watching. Hope this podcast finds you healthy, wealthy, and wise. What we're going to talk about in this episode is capital gains taxes and why they are so important. First of all, what are they? And how are they different than ordinary income taxes? But then also, why are they so important when you're designing your retirement plan? Okay, because reducing your taxes is one of the best ways to have your money last as long as you do, which is what we want to have happen. So we're going to dive into that. So thank you for watching. I'm going to bring my co-host here, Jeremy, into the picture. And actually, Jeremy, you're going to interview me.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we have the expert truly doing the interviewing.
So I started it, but you're going to interview.
Yes, absolutely.
So you're for people who are maybe old enough, you're the Ed McMahon to my Johnny Carson.
Absolutely.
So that's our plan.
Hey, I'll take that role any day.
So so one of the things that is very important is the whole thing about capital gains and ordinary income taxes. So go ahead, interview me. I'm ready to be interviewed.
Ken.
I'm psyched. I'm pumped.
Ken, what is a capital gain tax? What is a capital gain?
What is a capital gain? Let's start with that. Okay, so a capital gain is basically you buy something, let's say for $100.
Okay.
And then it appreciates in value, and now hopefully it's worth $200.
Ooh, fancy.
And so in that example, you just had a $100 capital gain.
Gotcha.
Right? That's different than ordinary income tax,
right,
which is wages and interest and dividends. It's not on the appreciation of an asset. It's on the income it's producing. That's ordinary income.
Gotcha. Okay. So it is a completely different kind of method of taxing something. Why is it taxed differently than wages? Why is it taxed differently than interest? Like, what's that difference?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk I've heard about, the capital gains taxes, favor rich people and we should abolish them. And, we've heard that some people pay less tax than their secretary or something like that. So the capital gains taxes were actually created for two reasons. One is fairness. Okay, because if we had no capital gains tax, then people who have assets, let's say you buy stocks, that's what you're retired now, right? Or you're a wealthy person, and you buy a bunch of stocks, and all you're doing is selling your stocks all the time to get the money you need to live on. If there's no capital gain on that, you'd pay no tax at all.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is you'd have a system where everybody would transition over into that side of things. And now the only people paying taxes are the people working, and the people getting interest on stuff. And that wouldn't be fair. So the first thing was to create a fair system.
Yeah.
The other thing also for capital gains, the reason is to encourage people to invest for the long term. Because what creates volatility and uncertainty and disruption in the economy is when there's a lot of people selling and buying it, it's happening really fast. That causes a lot of chaos, and it doesn't create a stable economic environment. So you want to have people, when they invest in things, to be long-term investors.
Yes.
You want them to buy and sit on it for a long time so that there's a stability there. And so that's why we have the difference with long-term investments, which are capital gains, and short-term, which are ordinary income.
Right, and you won't be taxed on it until you sell it.
Yes, that's correct. And that's a big advantage of the capital gain is that in the example I gave, your stock or your real estate, whatever you bought for $100 and now it's worth $200, that $100, you don't owe tax on it until you sell it.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it kind of locks things up.
Right.
People don't want to sell that because they don't want to pay that tax.
Yeah.
That is the downside of the capital gain tax.
Right.
Certainly.
Yeah. It incentivizes holding it and then also keeps people from wanting to sell it because I don't know anyone. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if I know anyone that likes paying taxes. I can't name anybody.
There's probably somebody out there who does. Very patriotic person.
Yeah.
And they're like, I want to help the country. I like paying taxes.
Absolutely. Okay, so we know what a capital gain is. We know how it's taxed. How do we apply that to actual retirement planning? Can you give me an example of something that is taxed regularly, like wages, things like that, and then something that would be taxed in the capital gains?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So when it comes to, how somebody who is planning for their retirement or is already retired, if we look at the investment, the places where they have their money. So the taxes are based on where you have your money.
Right.
Okay. So for example, if you have IRAs and you have 401ks and you have those things, if they are traditional, right, not the Roth version, but if they're traditional, then what happens is that every dollar that you take out most likely is going to be taxed at the highest ordinary income tax rate, because it's not, they've designed it in a way where they say this is not a capital gain, this is income, right?
Okay.
And so if you're taking money out of the IRA, 401k, you're taking income, and therefore you're taxed at the highest rate.
Right.
Now, if you have money that is not in an IRA, and we call that a non-IRA.
You fancy that.
Pretty creative
Succinct.
name.
Yeah.
So so if you have money in your non-IRAs, then what happens is that those dollars potentially could be taxed at capital gains rates. And the capital gains rates are potentially half
Oh, wow.
of what the ordinary income tax rates, if you're in a high enough bracket.
Right.
So there's a significant arbitrage, if you will, ability to pay a lower tax if you understand the difference between where your money is, what's the container that it's in versus where it's not.
Okay. So how do we actually implement that in like planning someone's financial retirement and things like that? How do we take advantage of that to get the least taxes paid and the most out of their money?
Yeah. So one of the rules that we like to apply is that you want to defer your ordinary income taxes for as long as possible. Defer. Okay? So when we work with a client, when they or even a brand new client, what we do is we want to segregate their dollars as IRAs, 401ks, those kind of things, but then we want to have all the non-IRAs that are taxed at potentially capital gains rates. Okay, so we have them in different columns. We segregate them, even though a lot of times people say, well, it's all my money. Well, it is all your money. You're right. But it's different. It's we have to think of them differently.
The government looks at them differently.
They certainly do.
Absolutely.
And from a tax standpoint, they are different.
Yes.
And so our goal is for your money to last as long as you do. And there are several things that can cause that not to happen: inflation, big bad bear markets, and taxes. Okay,
Yes.
So today we're talking about taxes. So if we can mitigate or reduce our taxes, defer the ordinary income tax for as long as possible, that goes a long way in most cases to having your money last longer.
Yes.
Okay, so what we do when we visit with a brand new client or with a prospective client who now wants to get income from their investments, we want to look at the order of events. Where are we going to get it from first? So with IRAs and those accounts, there are what are called required minimum distributions. So the required minimum distributions are there because of this dynamic that I'm talking about.
Yes.
People potentially could defer the money they have in their IRAs and all of that forever.
Yeah.
If there was no required minimum distribution.
Absolutely.
So what they don't want you to do is to do what we're saying. So what they want you to do is take it out and pay the highest tax.
Absolutely.
Okay? So when you get of the required minimum distribution age, you are now forced to take out a required minimum distribution. You have to take it all out, but you have to take a minimum.
Right.
And there's a formula for that, which we talk about in other podcasts. But for purposes of our conversation, that's going to be when you are forced. So what we want to do is not take anything out of those accounts until we are forced. Until we have to. Now, we may have to because we need it to live on.
Yes.
Which is okay if that happens.
Absolutely.
But if we don't need it to live on, if we have non-IRA money that we can live on instead, we want to start with that.
Yes.
Okay? Why? Well, let me use the example that I was using before. So let's say that you have $100 in non-IRA money, and over time it's grown to be $200 worth of non-IRA money. Okay? And you can draw from that to live on, and you don't need to touch the money that's in your IRAs and 401ks for the time being.
Right.
So when you take that money, the way they tax it is that $100 of capital gain is first.
Yes.
So you had $200, and let's say you're taking, $10 a year out, or I'm using small numbers, but
Yes.
you're taking $10 a year out. So you're going to use up, that $100 of gain.
Right.
So you'll pay capital gain tax on it. But then what happens is, and that's the beauty of this strategy, is that now if you start spending the $100 that you originally invested,
Yes.
there's no tax on that
Oh, yeah.
because there's no gain. The gain gets taxed first.
Right.
So you have a double benefit by applying this strategy. One is you're paying capital gains taxes, most likely. And in addition, when you've used up all those gains and now you're going into the $100 that you originally invested, that's all tax-free to you.
Yeah.
So you want to do that as long as possible before you go over here and start drawing from the money that is the highest possible tax.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those tax rates on capital gains, those change based on administrations.
Yeah, they change all the time.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 30 years, and it seems like every 3 years or 2 years they fiddle around with the tax code,
Yeah.
and inevitably ordinary income taxes change and capital gains taxes change.
Right.
The holding period changes.
Yes.
Currently it's 1 year, but before it was longer. So all of those things complicate it.
Mm-hmm.
But philosophically, what you want to be looking at is drawing from that money first before
Right.
you do the other.
Yeah.
And I met a gentleman, a couple, but he was kind of the chief financial officer
Yes.
of that family, and he had just drawn. He had non-IRA money, and he had IRA. He had rolled over his 401k, and he had an IRA, and he took out $50,000, to renovate his house and his kitchen and all this stuff that he was doing from his IRA.
Oh, no.
And, I don't ever like to put people on the spot, but I'm always curious to know, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And he said, because it was there. That's my retirement money, and I wanted to use it for that. And plus, I've got a lot of gain in this money over here, so I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, I know, but you traded a really high tax. You paid a higher tax because you didn't want to, pay the lower tax because he was in love with his investment over here and he didn't want to sell it.
Yeah.
But you can't be in love with your investments. You have to be in love with not paying the highest tax.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Uncle Sam really loves it when you do that. All right, Ken, talking about non-IRA money, what does that even mean? Because that seems like a broad generalization.
Okay, fair question. So from a 30,000-foot level, I would say that non-IRA is anything that is not tax deferred. Okay, so for example, your IRAs, the money grows without being taxed till you take it out. 401ks, the money grows, and then when you take it out, it's taxed. Annuities are the same. All those kind of things where they grow without being taxed, those are IRA tax deferred kinds of things. So anything that doesn't fall into into those kinds of buckets becomes a non-IRA. So if you have a brokerage account where you have stocks in there or bonds or whatever, I don't know, I guess Bitcoin would fit that if you own that, So anything any investment that you own that is not in these tax deferred or tax free accounts, that would be a non-IRA. And that's where you would be looking, potentially to get your income from. Now, this actually brings up something else, and that is there's a different kind of IRA, which is called a Roth IRA.
Yes.
And so the Roth IRA is basically the reverse of the traditional IRA. So the traditional IRA, you put your money in, you get a deduction for putting it in, it grows without being taxed, and then when you take it out, you pay tax on it then.
Yes.
Ordinary income tax. The Roth IRA is kind of the opposite of that. Basically, what happens there is you get no deduction for putting it in.
Right.
It grows without being taxed, and then when you take it out, it's tax-free.
Yeah.
So, if you're looking at a strategy of getting income during your retirement, it could be, very seductive to say I should get it from my Roth IRA first.
Right.
Right? Because
Right.
it'll be completely tax-free.
Of course, yeah.
And in many cases, that might make sense. However, there is something that you need to kind of put into the mix before you start drawing from your Roth IRA. Because the Roth IRA can be passed on as an inheritance, and your greedy unwashed, undeserving heirs, as we call them, they will love you because they just inherited a tax-free IRA.
Absolutely.
So imagine if you had inherited from, your parents or your grandparents, $100,000 in an account that grows without being taxed, and when you take it out, it's tax-free.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't you love that?
That would be great.
It is perhaps the best inheritance that you can leave.
Yeah.
So when we're doing the planning, we do want to take into account Roth IRAs and the fact that they are tax-free. But the fabulousness of it as a vehicle to leave an inheritance in kind of mitigates that enthusiasm and may cause us to say we're actually never going to touch the Roth until we have to.
Yeah, if they plan on wanting to leave something.
Well, that's true. I'll tell you something funny. We had, for years, when we were first thinking about our tagline of, we want your money to last as long as you do.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time, thinking about how we're going to come up with that. And at first, our thing was that, we want your money to outlast you. We wanted you to have, when you die, you've got lots of money. And a lot of clients were like, not so much. Once I get out of college, my job here is done.
Yeah.
So if the last check I write bounces, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So we changed it to, well, how about if your money lasts as long as you do?
Absolutely.
And they were like, we're good with that one.
It's a happy balance. Yeah.
And if there's anything left over, that's gravy.
Yeah.
My job is done. I'm now taking care of me.
Absolutely.
And enjoying our retirement. So that was, so that's how we came up with, we want your money to last as long as you do, as opposed to outlast you.
Yeah.
So that was funny.
Love that. What kind of sparked all of this kind of talk today, especially, was the fact that Texas was introducing a bill.
Yeah.
Right. And they're essentially wanting to keep capital gains, state level capital gain tax from forming in Texas.
Right. They basically, Governor Abbott in Texas just said they're banning it.
Yes.
They wanted to make it a law that you will never have a capital gain tax in Texas.
Right.
And I think Missouri is doing the same thing.
Missouri is doing the same thing. Florida's already doing it. Florida, they established there will be no state level capital gain tax. So what does that kind of do? Like, why would Texas, Florida, Missouri, and growing, I'm pretty sure it's going to be more states are going to be doing that. Why would they want to abolish that?
For the very exact reason that we've been talking about. They want to attract the people that have all the money, which is the people who are, getting ready to retire. That's where the money is,
Absolutely.
right? That's where people have spent their lives accumulating. They want those people in their state.
Yeah.
So Florida, Texas, Missouri, they want to attract all these retirees or these soon-to-be retired people.
Yeah.
They're at the highest wage earning that in their lives, and they're in their 50s. And once they retire, they spend money and they do all that kind of stuff. So what they're doing is they're trying to attract people. Because when you get to that certain point in your life where now you're talking about how am I going to get my income, you start thinking about the difference between ordinary income and capital gains.
Yeah.
And when you start thinking about that, you think, oh, well, if that state is charging me a capital gains tax and that one isn't, that could be a significant reduction in my cost of living, which your taxes are part of that. And so suddenly you can enjoy a much better, potentially that capital gain you would have paid in this state is enough that if you lived in this state, you could go on a cruise to Alaska or something with that money. So when you start doing that math, people will start moving.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right. Well, I think that pretty much covers it.
Well, actually, I wanted to get into something else, which is, there are different kinds of things besides just your 401k and your IRAs and your non-IRAs. There are also annuities, and there's also life insurance. And those are two other places where money can grow without being taxed. Okay, so in terms of the order of events, the last place that we encourage our clients to go get money from to get their income during their retirement is from their IRAs, their 401k, that money. We want to defer, okay, as long as possible. So then the next thing that you look at is, annuities. So annuities are essentially packages that have investments inside them.
Okay.
And those investments inside grow without being taxed until you take it out.
Okay.
However, the thing about annuities is that when you take the money out of the annuities, it's ordinary income. It's not capital gain. So even if you buy what's called a variable annuity, which is a package that contains mutual funds inside of it, and those mutual funds have they grow in value, and you take the money out, it's not a capital gain. It's ordinary income.
Gotcha.
Okay, and then there's life insurance. So life insurance has cash value buildup.
Yes.
So that's a kind of a weird animal. There are strategies that you can use with your life insurance policies where you can actually borrow against the cash value and take that out and use the dividends that the policy is paying to pay the interest on the loan you took out. And if you do that, then the income coming out is actually tax-free.
Oh, wow.
So there's some planning opportunities with that. However, it does create a potential tax time bomb later. Right. So you have to be careful with that one.
Yeah.
But so what we want to do with a client is we want to look at where is all their money.
Yes.
And how is each one of these things taxed. And then we want to create essentially an order of events. Where do we get the money first? Where do we get it second? Where do we get it third and fourth? And by doing that, we can mitigate or reduce the taxes and have, our goal is for our clients' money to last as long as they do.
Absolutely.
And so that goes a long way towards doing that.
Yeah.
So that kind of planning is something that we do. The other thing that we also do is we want to, there's kind of a concern, I guess, from people that when we introduce this concept to them, so you want me to use up all of my non-IRA money before I get any of my IRA money?
Right.
Eek.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do, except for an emergency fund. Okay, so we wanted to set the emergency fund, which, by the way, is a different podcast. But once you have your emergency fund, that needs to be cash liquid and as low tax as possible, which therefore it would be a cash thing. But once you satisfied that, then we would potentially draw down all the way to zero our non-IRA money.
Yeah.
Because like I said, when you're drawing it down to that point, you're living tax-free for a while.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
And tax freedom is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I'm not there. I don't know what that feels like. But for clients that are in that zone, that's a very nice place to be.
Yeah.
So, wow, that was a great interview there.
Well, thank you very much.
You did a heck of a job. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this episode of our podcast. I hope you understood the difference between capital gains and ordinary income and how you manage that within your retirement plan. It's a very, very important thing, and we'd certainly love to help you with it. Please like and subscribe this podcast. It helps us tremendously. Share it with your friends. And more importantly, go to our website. It's rpoa.com and visit with one of our retirement planners, and they might be able to help you to build your income plan. So again, thank you for watching. I, again, hope this podcast finds you healthy, wealthy, and wise, and we'll talk soon.